Thank you.
Yeah, all of that sounded so good. Hey, y'all. Thank you, Dr. McShay, for the introductions. And so, since we got two or more gathered here, I want to make sure that we continue to honor the Creator, the Spirit, the land, and our ancestors. And I have to be honest, when I first got this call, I was intimidated, not because I don't think that you're flesh and blood, of course you are, but because you vibrate so high, sis. And to be fair, in these past couple of months, it has been tough sometimes to vibrate at all.
Hmm.
But I have been surrounded with the word for the past year, abundance. And I'm like, what does abundance look like in a COVID though? Like when your folks are being terrorized and it's amped up and your folks are being terrorized, how on earth is this abundance? And in my recent meditation, God and the ancestors said, let me show you what abundance looks like. And so, as they open the space for us to be here, I have to open up this space for them. This is a ritual I have witnessed for since I was a child. I've incorporated it as an adult, and I'm so grateful that we get to do it together.
Okay.
So, I'm going to ask the elders for permission to speak. Um, Brother McShay.
Yes, please. My permission goes to you.
Thank you. Our stories stretch longest time and as wide as the multiverse. We are rich with gold, with water, with soil, with the generations of blood. We are not here alone, and we use our full selves to cultivate an even richer inheritance for our grandchildren because they will not walk alone either. We are stardust. I acknowledge the ancestors whose names I do not know, and I acknowledge the children yet unborn. I call out the name of the ancestors I do know, recently departed folks, and those who have been gone on for generations, to welcome them into this space with love and light. And as I do so, I pour water, libations into this plant, feeding life. This is to ensure that our space is not stiff and programmed, that we can breathe with each other collectively, y'all, across state lines, across time zones, and say, we are here. So, Ashanté and Patrisse, I'll invite you to call out names as well, and I'll pour for you. I'll say Ashe, a word of affirmation or agreement. So I speak my grandmother's name, Mrs. Zola Temple, Ashe. I speak my father's name, Bill Rhodes. I speak Baba Kwesi, Ashe, and Mama Audrey Lord, Ashe. Ashanté.
I speak my uncle's name, Patrick O'Neill Samuels, Ashe.
I just lost my grandmother last week, so I want to bring her into the space. My grandma, Viney Patton.
Ashe.
Ashe. I want to bring my father into the space, who I lost almost 11 years ago, Gabriel Bricknack.
Ashe.
And I want to bring in all of the Black folks who have died at the hands of law enforcement here in my county, in Los Angeles County, 622 people, almost 80% of them being Black. I want to bring them into this space as well.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Asante Sana, thank you. All right, y'all. So this is indeed a pleasure, from the South Side of Chicago, from Washington State to LA. Thank you. When I started sharing with my village about this talk, my friend Eldrin Diaz, he referred to you as one of the chief architects of New America. I had to write that down. So your contributions have a long range because you've been active since you were 16 years old. But I want to start us with the hashtag that you and Alicia and Opal used to set the globe ablaze. Black Lives Matter. Ashanté.
Thank you so much. I just want to take a moment to just honor what a beautiful opening here in Los Angeles. It's how we open up all of our events, our protests, is by pouring libation. And so thank you for having us do that in the digital space, and allowing for people to witness both at your university, but also whoever is tuning in and whoever will continue to tune in, how we have traditionally and real time honored our ancestors. It is a huge part of our lineage is to honor the people who came before us. There's no way that anybody on this screen or anybody witnessing this would be here today if it wasn't for our ancestors. So thank you for bringing us and grounding us in that. We started the Black Lives Matter hashtag that we wanted to become a movement because we understood that Black folks, especially younger Black folks, were not being provided or given the voice that we so desperately needed, especially in 2013. We were living in a moment where we were, where the mainstream media was still saying that we were in a post-racial America, that racism there was a question mark if racism still existed. And we knew as Black people that of course it existed. And when Trayvon Martin was murdered by a white passing man, and then and that man, George Zimmerman, was acquitted of that death, it became the searing moment for us to remind the country that we have not actually healed from white supremacy. We've not healed from racial terrorism, and that the work that we needed to do had to be a work that was radical, that was transformative, that was visionary, and that brought all Black people to the table, not just inside this country, but around the world. And so Black Lives Matter becomes an opportunity for us to have a new kind of conversation in the United States and across the globe.
Thank you. Ashanté?
And I thank you for that. I was 13 when I first saw the phrase Black Lives Matter. I was at an all-white school, 13, the only Black girl in my class. And so I saw this phrase and I was a bit conflicted. I'm like, all my peers, they're white right now. Like, I know this was like dumb now that I look back on it, but I was like, does this mean that white people's lives don't matter? But I sat there, I had a conversation with my parents, and I was like, no, this means that we matter too. Like, these injustices that we face, everything that I see in my life, like, we matter. And it was just nice to have that there, that platform, place to talk, just conversations, having it, like, starting to have them at school too, was just great.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that.
So what do you see? This is a general question we come to the party for, right? So what do you see as the biggest successes that you guys have had in the past year as an organization, especially these past 8 months?
Well, I think it's important for people to know that Black Lives Matter never stopped. Both our organization and our movement, even when 45 became the president, we continued to ground down and developing the strategy and the foundation for what you're seeing now, which is a movement that has been able to launch the largest racial justice protest movement in the history of this country. That is not by mistake. That doesn't happen for a movement that stopped developing and growing. In fact, that happens because as a collective, hundreds of organizations, both the Black Lives Matter Global Network organization, but hundreds of other Black-led organizations across the country continued to show up, to stand up, to fight back. And while we were not getting the kind of press and media from 2016 until now, until these uprisings, we did not stop doing the work. And that is so important for people to understand. We got more savvy in electoral politics. We got more savvy around how we challenge a fascist government. And we got more savvy around what we understood we needed to be laser focused on. And this election became one of those moments for us. We took the opportunity once Minneapolis decided to uprise in response to George Floyd, and Louisville decided to uprise in response to Breonna Taylor. We took that opportunity to continue to galvanize Black people around what we thought was important for our lives. So we developed legislation this year largely around defunding the police. And we saw, hundreds of cities across the country have to reckon with what we mean when we say defund the police and resource our communities. We had entirely new conversations around federal legislation. We launched the Breathe Act this year. And while it's not into law just yet, we do see it as the new civil rights bill. We see it as the civil rights bill that is going to get us closer to freedom. And so our work has been work both at the local level, where I've seen some of the most incredible Black organizing this year, to the national level, where we've, sat with the Congressional Black Caucus, and shared with them our vision to work together so that we can make this country the place where Black people can actually feel a sense of dignity and care and respect.
So, as you said, the profile has been raised of Black Lives Matter, right? And so there's a celebrity that comes with this, is a sexiness, is the commercialization. And this also makes you guys more of a target, right? So what support do you need from folks who aren't as visible and as targeted as you? What are the best ways we can be co-conspirators?
Love that question. And I'm so grateful that you sort of led with like all the things that more visibility provides. Some people don't really understand. They think, oh, they're always on TV and they are signing deals with Warner Brother. And so that must mean that they, have it all together, and they don't actually realize what's at stake for us. That every single day we're fielding death threats, that every single day that we are being impacted by people impersonating us and saying terrible things about us on the internet, that Breitbart spends most of its time, and Fox Television spends most of its time trying to minimize and demonize our movement. And so I'm grateful that you sort of gave the full picture of what that looks like. And, I think how people can show up and support is challenging misinformation and disinformation that happens around Black Lives Matter and its leadership. If you see people posting something that actually seems like it's going to create hysteria, then it's probably misinformation and disinformation. Always question. I have people who will text me now and say, hey, is this real? Is this a real thing? And I can say yes or no, because I'm the one in the middle of the storm. And so challenge your friends and your family and the internet when it tries to say terrible things about Black Lives Matter and its leadership. Number two, the way you could show up for our movement is by reminding people that this is a movement that may be the movement we understand right here and right now, but this movement is 400, 500 years old. This is not anything new, unfortunately. There's new fights, but what we are fighting for is Black liberation. And that should be clear to everybody who is involved and anybody who wants to be a co-conspirator, ally, or accomplice of this movement. This is a long-standing history, and we just happen to be the most visible leaders. But there's a long-standing history of people who've been fighting for Black liberation. And lastly, the way people can show up is check on your Black friends and family. Check on the Black organizers, activists, educators who are often shouldering the burden of white supremacy. Check on us. Do right by us. Black Lives Matter launched a campaign almost 3 weeks ago called Black Women Are Divine, in response to the killing of Breonna Taylor and so many other Black women at the hands of police violence, but also at the hands of domestic violence. And we wanted to just give ourselves something amazing and lovely. And there was events across the country and across North America as well, outside of Canada, just Black Women Are Divine events. We also lifted up over 25 Black women on our social media accounts. And then we sent all of them gifts, sage, candles, flowers, all by Black women vendors, and lifted those Black women vendors up, and really trying to create a new culture around how we see Black women.
Thank you for that. That transitions us right into talking about the humanity, right? So I have to say, this book, when they call you a terrorist, you are absolutely a storyteller. And shout out to Asha Bandele for standing and sitting alongside you to write this. Your transparency in this memoir came to me like a flood. It was so easy to get into the water at first. Your imagery and your poetry were perfect. And then I was completely consumed. The pain of it is palpable. And then I was confronted with my own privileges and confronted so hard in the ways that I've stuffed my pain down with my education and my accomplishments. And so you tore that away a little bit. I ain't like it. But the book is full of how you talk about your very first friend, your brother, and your relentless embrace of him. And so I had to think about my own brother and the distance I put between him and myself for the exact same reasons you loved on Monty. And you haven't let him go. So I have to focus on our humanity. One of the most poignant images for me was when you described holding your father while he was high and pouring his tears and his heart out to you, and you wouldn't look away. And you cried with him. And so you wrote, I have to lift this up. Seeing him like this feels like my soul is being pulled over shards of glass, but I do not turn away. His life is not expendable. Our love is not disposable. So I want you to talk to us a little bit about your journey in loving unconditionally, while you yourself need that exact measurement of love.
Ooh, you're gonna have me in tears, Dr. Waters. I was like, I did not plan for this tonight. I have face full of makeup. Yeah, I mean, you know, when we made a decision to write a memoir, it was very much not what I was traditionally gonna write. I was not gonna write a memoir. I was gonna write a polemic. I was gonna talk about Black Lives Matter and how we evolved, and I was definitely gonna, you know, share some of my stories. But once my book agent and Asha heard more about my life, they were like, you need to write a memoir. And I was like, but I'm so young and there's so much more of my life to live. And they're like, you can write a second one. People do it all the time. This needs to be told. This story needs to be told because people need to understand the human being that helped start Black Lives Matter. And I agreed to it. I agreed to it because I was witnessing the nation side with Rudy Giuliani calling us terrorists. I was witnessing the nation side with Fox News. I had just had my son in March of 2016. You know, when the killings of when the Dallas shootings happened in June or July that summer. And so I was only a few months pregnant, and I watched the news sully our names, blame the shooting on us, and allow for a narrative that I couldn't control. And so I talked to Asha and said, you know, I want to write this book. Will you help me do it? And she was like, absolutely. And I spent the next 2 years writing it with her and developing it with her and deciding, you know, what was going to be the strongest conversation. And at first we were like, we'll start with the story of BLM, you know, and kind of tell my life through that. And we sent it over to folks and they said, no, that doesn't work. Start from the beginning. Start from your childhood. Let's take us through. And that meant many of nights, you know, many of mornings. I would wake up at 5 a.m. to write with Asha. She lives on the East Coast, and cry and process. And I spent a lot of time recognizing and realizing that I grew up in a war zone, that our community was poor and needed all kinds of resources and support. And the only thing we got was militarized police, LAPD. And I also realized the impact that had on me and my family. And, I learned unconditional love from my mother. She's a woman who, even in the moments of really being hurt by my fathers, she held space for them, and not in a way that was out of alignment with her dignity. I never felt like she wasn't in her dignity. I always felt like she was in her dignity, while also allowing for these men that often weren't so good to her continue to show up for their children. And so, part of me, when my father was in and out of the house, whether it was due to incarceration or due to drug dependency, I remember, my father that raised me, Alton Cullors, checking me one time and saying to me, because I was complaining about my father, Gabriel Brickneck, for being in prison again. And he said, essentially, we have one life to live. Show up for your dad. He needs you. And I took that really to heart. It was very hard for my father that raised me to accept my father, Gabriel. And so to see that evolution in him motivated me to be present for Gabriel. And I'm so glad I was, because I didn't know that he'd be taken from me so early. And so I got to spend every moment with him, and the most painful of times and the most joyous of times. And when we get to see ourselves with other human beings in the most vulnerable moments, we allow ourselves to just have more room for ourselves and each other. And that, to me, is the center of Black Lives Matter. It's a movement that gives more room for Black people. There's no perfect victim. We squashed that narrative as more and more Black people were killed by the police, and as more and more media would say, well, what, did he have a weapon or not? Mm-hmm. We would remind, it does not matter. No person should be allowed to kill another person. That's if we're talking about the sanctity of life, then that should mean everybody has to abide by that. Definitely. And so our job is to give more room to ourselves as Black people, because we're never given space. We're never given room. And so we have to model that for each other.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much, because I think a lot of people miss the fact that healing is a part of Black Lives Matter. That's a part of the tenets. It's a part of the makeup. It's a part of the programming. Because fear is a real part of this work. Between state violence, the administration, I too am a mother to a Black son. I birthed in October, high-risk pregnancy in 2016, and we named him Tribe. And good Lord, he is our greatest teacher. So we know that joy is an act of resistance, right? So I'm gonna pass the next question over to Ashanté.
Yeah, and so we know that joy is an act of resistance, like Dr. B was saying. So how do you create and sustain joy?
I just be in full transparency. My dog is in the house. I usually have her go outside, and she's a hot ass mess. So if she starts barking, forgive her and me. Her name is Squabbles. It's my brother's dog, actually. And my brother's in a mental health facility right now. He's doing well, but his dogs mean everything to him. So she's staying with me until he comes home. But she's very protective. So if she hears anything, she starts barking. You have to ask me that question again, because she distracted me. I apologize.
I have a dog too, I understand. So how do you create and sustain joy?
A lot of different ways. I am a big, firm believer in cultivating joy. I do not believe that you have to, I don't believe in waiting around for joy to come to me. I believe, and I think most Black folks know this, I believe that we have to create joy in our life. And so that looks like impromptu dance parties with my kid a lot of the time, who loves to dance and loves music. That looks like cracking up at this dog that my brother named Squabbles. who has one eye. She's hanging on, y'all, but she's working it out, and just like having a good time with her. It means I often, and I like whoever's watching this and everyone who's here on the Zoom with me, please go to Twitter and just look at like memes or jokes on Twitter. The best. I can watch it for an hour and like when I laugh, I like belly laugh, jaws open, like I can't even help it. That's just how I laugh. And so for me, I like to laugh so hard that I have to stand up and run around, like to get it out of myself. So this is what I mean about cultivating joy. It's too hard what we go through. It's too much. And so there has to be space where we create, the portals of joy in our life.
So yes, shouting out trust Black women, cite Black women is a much different rallying cry than our mothers and aunts, and especially our grandmothers experienced. I remember digging through stuff, looking at Black women's work in the 50s, even something as simple as the Brown versus Board case. We lift up Oliver Brown's name in that, not Darlene Brown, who actually should have been first. And so we erased the 12 Black women who were on that docket, by that intentional omission because a man had to lead it. And so here y'all are standing in this millennium space and all your beautiful, rich, brown, Black woman, immigrant queerness, rallying for Black children and Black families and Black folks across the country and the world. And y'all felt that erasure early on too. It took Essence Magazine to move that forward and more tragedy to move that forward. But what does it mean right now to trust Black women?
I think when 45 was elected and we started to look at who elected him and who didn't, and we realized 98% of Black women did not vote for Trump, was the moment that I realized the Trust Black Women hashtag wasn't just a brand, that it was actually our truth. And that in every single situation and moment that we are in this country where we have got it ass backwards, Black women have the antidote. We have the cure. We have the subscription every single time. And that's from, analog things to also the development and curation of some of the most important science and technology things. We are the antidote. We are the cure. And that to me is, I think it's hard for our patriarchal society, our white supremacist patriarchal society. It's hard for people to feel and to feel like Black women winning means everyone's winning. Mm-hmm. And so it's our job as a people, I'm really talking to Black people right now. It's our job as a people collectively to recognize that it is truly okay to allow Black women to lead. That doesn't mean that you aren't part of that leading. That doesn't mean that you're weak or vulnerable. It actually gives you more strength. We come from matrilineal societies. We come from matriarchal societies. That's in our DNA. And so we have to allow that to be a part of how we show up. And every time I work alongside Black women, I see the best of ourselves be represented and the best of ourselves be curated for the rest of, our people, but also the rest of the world.
Yeah, for sure. So we're still in the fight for our own humanity. And right now, many of us are pushing so-called controversial language to rock these old ideologies. So we're talking about abolish, disrupt and dismantle, co-conspirators, these intentional terms that are digging deeper than diversity, social justice, and ally, but they scare folks. So whether it's in prison or education, here, as well as our eyes on what's happening in Nigeria with SARS. And I want to sit with abolish. Okay. Ashanté, you take the next question.
Yeah. So even when I think about abolish, like when I first heard it, I was scared. I was like, abolish? Like, how are we going to do this? And like you said earlier, like it's 400 years and just years of the system. Like, how are we going to get rid of it? A new one. It's scary. And so why do you think abolish is so scary? And what does it mean to you?
Well, I think the abolitionist movement scares people because we haven't dreamed big enough or imagined deep enough what else is possible. Whenever I hear about people being scared of abolition, their first question is, well, what else? What else can we do? Who's going to replace these things that we've relied on? And I always give someone else the question back. Well, what do you want to see? What kind of world do you want to live? Do you really want to live in a world where Black people are unable to walk, sleep, drive, drink, be with their families without the threat of dying? Is that the world? Is that what we're willing to sacrifice to continue with the current system that we have in place? Because that's what we're doing. We're sacrificing Black human beings so that other people can feel safe. Is that true safety? And so I start with that question for people. What would you want to see? What's the kind of world you want to, not just the institutions you want to see, but let's just start with the feelings. What kind of feeling do you want to feel when you wake up in the morning? What kind of experience do you want to have when you're with your coworkers and when you're with your family members and when you're going to your spaces of worship? What do you want things to smell like and taste like? I try to get people to be in their bodies because oftentimes people are so reliant on their fear and what they're scared of that they don't give themselves a space and opportunity to feel what they're excited about or what the opportunity is. Abolition is not just the destruction of something. We're not just destroying something. Abolition allows us to imagine a new and profoundly different experience than what we have experienced for the last 500 years.
I got excited, my bad. I'm gonna move us forward to one of the last themes here, and it's talking about artistry and the future of the movement. So most folks know you as one of the faces of Black Lives Matter, but I noticed in many of the spaces you identify as artists, sometimes artists first. And here I have to shout out Lisa Brock, who was my professor at Columbia and now friend. And you and I have the Arcus Center connection where you directed Power from the Mouths of the Occupied. And you have several works, including Stained and Malcolm Revisited and your Daily Digest on IGTV. You have all of these gifts and you use all of these platforms. So you recently released a young adult edition of When They Call You a Terrorist. What inspired you to want to ensure that your book was accessible to these readers?
I wanted to make sure that a new generation of organizers and activists had something from me. I was a young activist. I devoured books from Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and Toni Morrison and Octavia Butler. I devoured those books and I literally read every single book of theirs. I felt finally seen and represented, and I wanted to offer that same feeling and experience to a younger audience. Each chapter closes with questions for young people to read and check out and look at and reflect on. If I had a book like this, none of the books that I read had those kind of reader questions. If I had a book like this when I was a younger activist, it would have gone such a long way. I would have probably got all my girlfriends. We would have had like book club together and talked about, the questions together. And so I also see it as a place for young organizers and activists to community build with one another.
Awesome. I know I want to take a couple of questions from the audience, but real quick, you are so diligent and intentional about lifting up names and people. You shout out more names than you shout out. So who do you want to lift up right now? Who are you reading? Who are you listening to?
Oh, good. Thank you. I have it ready.
Yes.
Elisa Garza's book, The Purpose of Power, is out right now, everybody. Check her out. This is my girl, my co-founder. It's so beautiful. It made me anxious for half of the book because I was like, ooh, I know all those things you're talking about. But it's also very beautiful. And Elise is a really, really private person. And so she shares parts of her story that I think was really bold and courageous of her. And she offers so much for us as a generation to reflect on around what's happening in our movement. I have a bunch of artists in my house. That art right there is from Allison Sarr.
I totally want to ask you about that. Thank you. Yes.
Piece right here that I generally am using when I'm doing Daily Digest or any of my other events. The lighting was better this way. So, but this is Allison Sarr's work. I'm gonna just be a little bit more. I'm gonna show you one more piece because I just have to. This is it says Tamir Rice on it, and it has 12 hearts. And one of my favorite artists, his name's Foremost. He actually did that work. I have a lot of his work in my house, yeah, those are the artists and the author that I want to lift up right now.
Oh, thank you, Patrisse. Now we need to talk again because I want to show you the artwork in my house.
Email exchange. We can talk crystals and art.
Yes. Talk to me a little bit, or talk to us a little bit about how your art has shaped your activism, because it's such a
amazing. Well, people don't realize, I mean, maybe more now that I'm an artist as well as an organizer, and that my art and my organizing are extensions of my political values. And when I'm my art is focused on performance and large scale public art, large scale installations in public. And so I am often trying to figure out what's the best medium to impact the most people. Given we're in COVID times, performance art is not a thing that's happening in the same ways, or even public art. And so the latest art project I did was commissioned by Red Cat Gallery here in Los Angeles, called Malcolm Revisited. And it's taking Malcolm's speeches and bringing them into a short film. Aaron Lang and Brian Gonzalez and I are the performers in this piece, and Sata is the director, and Slow Blink co-produced it with me. And this work really comes out of a piece that I did in 2016 in June, right after my pregnancy, where I brought Malcolm's speeches to stage. And I wanted to do this work this time around as a conversation around voting. We use the ballot or the bullet. And I wanted to really talk about what Malcolm was trying to communicate as he was talking about the ballot or the bullet.
So since you said that, in light of this upcoming election and ongoing abolitionist and anti-racist practices, what is Black Lives Matter's greatest asset toward liberation?
Our greatest asset is our ability to be nimble. We started off as a hashtag, then we transformed into a global network. And then we recognized time and time again that we want to be iterative as a network. We don't want to be stale. We don't want to be relying on our past. And it's so important for us that we are able to see and observe what the future of Black Lives Matter looks like, and listen to each generation that wants to be a part of this movement. And so I feel like our nimbleness and our willingness to be transformed is our greatest asset.
So I think I'll come up with one of the last questions, and then you can ask us questions because I'm sure it's stuff you might want to talk about, storyteller. But what does a holistic Black agenda look like? So we're not just always focused on dying in the streets. Well, I don't want to lead the question for you, but what does a holistic Black agenda look like?
Well, I think that we have to think about a multi-pronged strategy to get us towards Black liberation. We know that historically, whenever Black people have rose up, whenever we've said it's time for us to determine our own destinies, that there's always been a backlash. And that backlash has looked like white supremacists. It's looked like white supremacy, both at the vigilante level and at the institutional level, clamping down and not willing to give up their power. And so we have to recognize what's possible in shaking the system and changing the system, and then what's possible in starting our own systems and our own spaces. I think a lot about Tulsa. Yeah. I think a lot about Africatown. I think a lot about these independent spaces that Black people created because we were iced out of the mainstream conversation or mainstream institutions. And I think it's powerful that we challenge what exists while we also build up what we want.
Yeah, for sure. So in these conversations, what do you miss? What are we missing? What are we not asking you? What's left?
I feel like this was so generative and resourceful, this conversation. So I'm like, I feel so complete, but I don't know. You really asked all the questions, y'all.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting. I was monitoring the chat because I wanted to make sure that if anybody in the room wanted to come in. So that was my way to kind of stall a little bit. But it looks like we got some clearance over here. I am so absolutely grateful that we are able to share this space. Oh, here we go. Yep. Yes. Michael. I think people in the audience might have been shy. So here we go. Question from Michael. Corporations like Walmart and Amazon claim Black Lives Matter, while at the same time, many Black folks who work for their companies, if there are at all, are underinsured or not making a living wage. What do you make of these sorts of moves on the part of the corporations?
Well, I think that so many corporations have decided that Black Lives Matter is a palatable phrase to say now. And so they have been really pressured into using the term Black Lives Matter. And we need to hold these corporations to task. All of them that have used the word, but especially those like Walmart and like Amazon, who have traditionally and historically been some of the worst players when it comes to Black lives. Everyone has their right to say whatever they want, but it's also in our right to continue to organize and demand better of these corporations, and we should, and we have to.
Ashanté, thank you. Ashanté, you had somebody on the line?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to mess up this name and I really apologize. I want to say Te Anjule. They ask, in addition to your book, what advice do you have for those seeking to organize uprisings in our community?
You should read Unapologetic by Charlene Carruthers. You should check out, obviously, Alicia Garza's The Purpose of Power. You should definitely check out, the Combahee River Collective. I'm a big fan of Audre Lorde's work. You should read Assata Shakur's autobiography and Angela Davis and Elaine Brown. There's so many people that you can read and study. But more importantly, uprisings don't happen with an individual. So one person doesn't start an uprising. Rather, a collective of people have to come together to decide, what's the best tool and tactic in this moment. Sometimes that's an uprising, sometimes that's legislation, sometimes it's both, sometimes it's a conversation. But, because we've seen uprisings on television and social media, I think we tend to think like that is the thing that's going to change everything. Mm-mm. It's one part of a larger strategy to change the system.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for throwing that out there, especially saying legislation and just like collective work. I think that's good for people to hear. Next question is from Leanne. When you visited Tacoma in 2017, you spoke about telling your friends that your social time was now designated as activism time. If they wanted to hang out, they could join you in whatever work you were doing. I'm curious how you're managing your social and activism life now, 3 years later in the midst of COVID.
Oh, that sounds like I said some shit like that. I'm like workaholic much. That is not my attitude in 2020. I'm so glad that you must have took notes in 2017 when I was there. No, bad advice. 2017 Patrisse was burnt out and worked too much and didn't cultivate a lot of joy. So glad that you brought that up. I cannot believe that I gave you that advice. I'm so sorry. And this is my humble response in 2020, where at the onset of quarantine and here in Los Angeles, I was incredibly anxious. Sure, I was anxious because there was a global pandemic happening, but I was more than anything, I was anxious because I didn't know what was going to happen. And all of my plans had been disrupted, including I was supposed to head to a university the next day to fly out to go speak. For a week, pretty much everything stopped, and I couldn't handle how anxious I was because I wasn't working. And I had to have a really honest conversation with myself about how much I worked and how much I relied on work as a part of my identity. I was already in therapy, so I asked my therapist if I could see her twice a week. And I've spent the last several months since March in therapy twice a week, and it's changed everything. It's changed my mental health. It's changed my outlook on what's necessary. Work will always be here. This movement will always be here. You do not have to work 24/7. In fact, I encourage you not to. The 2017 Patrisse, yes, I made all my friends do work with me. That's not what I do anymore. I didn't have the best of friendships then, and I love my friend group and my community, but they were probably exhausted by me and didn't want to spend a lot of time with me because all I wanted to talk about was work. So now I have a very different relationship to my community, very different relationship to my health and my well-being. I'm probably the happiest I've ever been, and that's wild because it's a global pandemic and Black people being killed every day. But I have recognized that I get to choose my happiness and my joy, and I will not allow for the system to take that from me. And I won't allow the work that is so important and so critical to me to become work that I do out of obligation. This work that I do is from a deep, profound place of love for my people. And so no, Ashanté, the 2017 Patrisse, I have a lot of love for her and a lot of, generosity and vulnerability towards her. But 3 years later, I am giving you new advice. Te Angela. We hopefully, maybe you'll say your name and we'll know how to say it. But forgive us for not knowing how to pronounce your name. But yes, that's the advice I'm giving you in 2020.
I want to say thank you for lifting up therapy. Yes. Thank you for lifting up joy, circling us back with the ancestors talking about abundance, even in the midst of twin pandemics, what that looks like. And I'm going to close this out with the last question so Dr. Michelle can do us right. So this one comes from Colin Sierra. Will the outcome of the presidential election change the agenda of the movement? And if so, how?
Absolutely. No matter who becomes a president, we will continue to fight on behalf of Black lives. We'll continue to call for defunding the police, and we'll call for the Breathe Act, and we'll call for redistribution of resources. But depending on who becomes the president really depends on the strategy in which we call for those things. Let's remind ourselves that this current president has called us a terrorist organization, has really put targets on Black Lives Matter leaders' backs and other Black folks across the country. So it will shift how we are relating to ourselves and the country. And how that will be, I don't know yet. We'll have to see.
Ashanté.
Wow, this was powerful. My heart is full this evening. And I want to just share with our audience that this concludes our program. But before we end, I'd like to say that co-founder Cullors, we are so, so grateful that you joined us for this powerful, hope-centered, healing conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, just that thank you, right? Thank you for all you've done to help us imagine a future, right, where Black lives and Black thriving and Black joy and Black liberation becomes a reality for descendants of the African diaspora here in the US and around the globe. I'd also like to thank Dr. Sankofa Waters and Ashanté Samuels for so artfully guiding us through this awe-inspiring conversation this evening with co-founder Cullors. Thanks to the members of our audience for submitting questions, and a special thanks to our colleagues in the Office of Equity and Inclusion, the Office of Advancement, and an IT for all of your stellar work in helping to plan and execute this event. I just want to share that this conversation is just starting. We want it to continue, and there's an opportunity for our campus community to come together tomorrow, 12:30 to 1:20, where we'll have a follow-up event called Now We Transform, Campus Community Reflections on Patrisse Cullors' message. And so we are really grateful to Dr. Jimmy McCarty, who will be serving as the moderator for that event. And check your email. You should have the Zoom link information so that you can access the program for tomorrow. So again, to one and all, thank you. So very thankful for all of you joining us this evening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.
Peace.
Good night, y'all.